So, as I mentioned previously, we are very pleased to welcome our special guest today, Federico Borsari. Again, he's a resident fellow at CEPA, or the Center for European Policy Analysis, and he's here to discuss CUAS, which for us normies means countering unmanned aerial systems, counter drone stuff. So yeah, we're definitely interested to talk about that, and I think Erlend maybe is going to take over from here. Erlend, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph, and welcome, Federico. Buonasera.
Sarah, thanks so much for having me, guys.
Yeah, so I'm super happy that you could join us. Thank you so much. I found that you wrote a very interesting article, and some of our team members reached out to you via our profile. You responded immediately, so that's we're very happy to have you. I just wanted to briefly let you introduce yourself. I see that you have you're obviously an Italian national. You have background from the universities of Modena, Bologna, and also worked as a researcher uh, in the University of Milan. But right now you're in the US, right? What happened? How did you end up there?
Yeah, that's true. It's a it's a long story, but to keep it short, after basically finishing my studies, I started to, being interested in, security and defense, especially in the Middle East and North Africa region. And that's why after, my master in Milan, I went to Iraq and the Kurdistan region to spend a few months there to do field work on relations between local security forces, also known as Peshmerga, and the Iraqi security forces. So in the context of the federal Iraq, and I stayed a few months doing some research, some field work, and a lot of interviews with local people, local military personnel, etc. And since then, I've being more and more interested in some of the dynamics that have characterized the basically the security landscape in the region, which has become more and more volatile in the past few years. And the ISIS onslaught in 2014 and the following years, the international campaign to stop the terrorist group, and also the civil war in Syria, of course. And one of the trends and one of the dynamics that popped up increasingly in many of the flashpoints across the region was the use of unmanned aerial systems or drones. And so my interest increased in that type of system, that type of weapon. And now I'm in DC since basically a couple of years doing research on this topic within the context of transatlantic relations and security. And of course, the war in Ukraine has been a major focus of my work. We have seen an increasingly interesting and varied and incredibly different use of these systems during the conflict, and a lot of reverberations of this use, not just in the European context, but also here in the US. There's a lot of talk about these type of capabilities. Everyone is now trying to discern what the trajectory might be of these systems, what are the technological, let's say, innovations, what are the challenges, and where Western militaries should invest in, right, to keep up with what we are seeing in Ukraine. So I'm more than happy to discuss with you some of these issues. And yeah, the focus of today might be, for instance, the use of Shahed by Russia, which is actually you know uh, something that has been ongoing since at least the beginning of 23, right? Even before that, uh,
Mm.
actually a system that has been used a lot by other countries, and especially Iran previously. So more
Yeah,
than delve into this topic with you guys.
yeah, that's a good bridgeway because drones they've been around quite a while in different capacities, and certainly armed drones and one-way attack munitions have been on the focus for some people, but it wasn't really until the war in Ukraine started that uh, we got a lot of attention on this topic. And the Shahed drones introduction in Ukraine was definitely a big wake up for the West, because we weren't really prepared for how to deal with this. And I guess you're going to talk a little bit more about it. I'm going to go ahead and go to the page where you have your presentation, and let me know when you want to change the slides.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so basically, a few months back, I started to kind of register and collect all the data coming from the Ukrainian Air Force on the use of Shahed drones or Garand drones, as Russia has renamed them, in Ukraine. And the Ukrainian Air Force has been providing data on their use since at least the mid 23, right? So more than a year ago. But at the same time, the accuracy of the data that they have provided was not actually very good. They simply shared statistics about how many drones more or less were launched and detected by the Ukrainian air defenses, and at the same time how many of them were shot down or basically destroyed. So we had two kind of data, right? And so at the beginning, the statistics were not very revealing. I mean, we could of course discern the amount of drones that the Ukrainians were able to destroy, but we didn't know how they were doing that and how they were achieving that rate of success or insuccess. And of course, at the beginning, that type of capability was a kind of a new, right, and a novel threat into the Ukrainian conflict. And so for Ukrainians was not immediately clear how to counter them, also because Russia was becoming more and more, like, I would say, bold and capable of using them in complex, airstrikes and air campaigns against Ukrainian infrastructure. So they were mixing, Shahed drones with missiles of different types, cruise and air ballistics. And so the complexity of these strike packages was kind of difficult for Ukrainian air defenses. But now that their, let's say, overall layer of air defenses is becoming more and more varied and with different type of capabilities. Of course, Ukraine is also has been much more capable of dealing with this threat. And as I mentioned, at the beginning, the data were not very, I would say, good or stimulating from a research perspective. But then starting in the spring and especially in the summer, the Ukrainian Air Force started to differentiate the type of effects that the Shahed attacks were having, right, and how they were destroyed. And
Yeah,
so, as you can see in the slide,
I have a question before you
Ukraine.
go there.
Yeah, please,
Do you
please.
have any considerations for why they suddenly decided to differentiate the statistics at that very moment? Before we
Yes.
go into the granular details of what actually is happening.
Of course. Thanks for the question. I'm more than happy to be, of course, disproved, or if someone has any additional thoughts, I would more than welcome their feedback. But my idea is that at the beginning, at least, Ukrainian air defenses were less differentiated, were mainly based on kinetic interceptors of different types, of course, short range, medium range, long range. Man pods were also part of that portfolio of capabilities, and of course tactical aviation. But more or less, the overall, let's say, basket was that of kinetic countermeasures. And so that's why electronic warfare, for instance, and other techniques were not, used, or at least were used on a very, limited scale against Shads at the beginning. But after the Ukrainians started to kind of learn from the type of threat that they were facing, Shaheds were flying very slow and low. They were sometimes difficult to detect. With simple radars, they needed different types of countermeasures. They started to inject new and different types of capabilities, mainly electronic warfare based, but also cheaper interceptors, and we will come on this point later, I think. But so that's why I think starting in beginning of this year, having more and more and different types of effectors and countermeasures integrating to their air defense, let's say umbrella, Ukrainians were also able to register data in a more proficient and let's say precise way. So that's why we have also statistics that are much better to use for research purposes, and that's why you're seeing in the slide the kind of difference, right, between the first months of the year, where you still see shutdown as the deeper blue, and the not intercepted, or let's say Shaheds that were able to kind of reach their target or at least bypass air defenses in red. But then after a few months, you'll see also the beginning of electronic warfare effects into the graph, right? And that's precisely where Ukraine's Air Force started to record this type of effects. And um, in the second graph, you will see that on the percentage of electronic warfare has become more and more prevalent in the past few months, and especially starting in August. So now we have days where electronic warfare basically accounts for even more than 50% of total Shaheds that are deactivated or destroyed, um, which is great, right? Because that's precisely the goal of counter US. So be more as much as sorry, be as cheap as possible against this type of threat,
Yeah,
because we know that the Shahads, of course, are estimate the price range is estimated between, like, let's say 35 $50,000 per unit, and sometimes more, depending on the lack of components or the cost of labor, of course, whether we consider that in Iran or in Russia, which is of course different. So having cheap countermeasures is always welcome, because otherwise your cost effectiveness becomes too, let's say, too high, too low, and too negative, right, in terms of what's the price per single interception. So electronic warfare is becoming more and more prevalent, and if you go on with the slides, and in the next one, you will see that of the overall numbers of Shahads that have been launched against Ukraine since July, and the number is 3,666. The more or less 17% of that, which is 620, has been deactivated with electronic warfare. This is, of course, based on Ukrainian official statistics. And if you move on with the next graph, that's precisely the what I'm talking about. So you will see that 17% of total Shahad's launch have been lost to electronic warfare, which is a pretty good percentage on the overall number, right? And of course, you will also see that 6% has managed to go through air defenses, and this is where Ukraine, I think, has to work to improve, because on average, we're talking about like 92% of effectiveness on average in the past 3 months against Shaheds, but still there is an 8% more or less that managed to bypass air defenses and reach its target, or at least explode against something. which creates damages, can kill civilians, can kill people, destroy critical infrastructure, for instance, or even residential buildings. So this is, of course, something that it's not acceptable, and Ukraine has to work to kind of increase even more the effectiveness. But more on average, the impact of electronic warfare is of around 12% in the past 3 months. So this is remarkable, considering also the way through which Russia has also been using this type of weapon, and because Russia is learning and is trying to deceive and make it difficult for Ukraine to intercept even the Shaheds, which are considered at the lower end of the spectrum, right? So now is trying to make them more resistant and hardened against electronic warfare, is trying to make them flying higher and faster, and along predefined routes to evade Ukrainian air defenses and mobile fire groups. So Russia is learning, and it's a constant a cat and mouse game, as everyone used to say now, in the drone space, and that's applied as well to the counter US part of the equation.
Yeah, and I don't think necessarily just the number of how much a missile or interceptor is worth it's not the only factor. I think also the overall production capacity and the willingness to deliver certain amount of interceptors and air defense systems to Ukraine is also a factor in itself. And
Of
it
course,
seems like
yes.
this calculus and the numbers might, it's on the paper it's easy to illustrate things, but I think it's an even bigger problem than just the number on the paper for Ukraine.
Yes,
So
no, that's definitely the case, and also one thing that I think is worth noting is that um, you know mobile fire groups and specialized units that hunts down Shaheds are not made of robots, or simply created overnight. You need to train them, you need to integrate them into the force structure in a proper way, and so they also need resources, as you said, so production capacity for low cost interceptors. We are talking about interceptors that can be rocket based, or mainly coming from manpads capabilities, or from for instance type of systems that have been exported to Ukraine by Western countries, provided by Western countries such as the US. We are talking about the Vampire systems, for instance, that use a type of rocket which is quite cheap, right? And has been created precisely for the type of counter US that we are talking about. And so the cost of these interceptors is if we talk about the advanced precision kill weapon system, which is the rocket used by the Vampire, which is a laser guided rocket, is around, let's say, $45,000 per unit, which is right almost on par with the Shahed cost, more or less. So this is fine. But when you can use when you have to use, sorry, manpads like the Stinger or others, the cost per interception goes up a bit, and becomes even higher with the high-end interceptors, of course. So you don't want to use those for the chat, and you can see in the videos here in the slides that there are many types of kinetics that you can use against the Shaheds. The Gepard self-propelled anti-aircraft gun is a great example of that, even though the cost, of course, depending on how many munition it uses to shut down a Shahed, can go up. Sorry, but it's certainly cost effective, and it's mobile as well. Then you have manpads, as I mentioned, and also tactical aviation, which is, I think, the least one of the least ideal options that you want to use against Shaheds. But sometimes you have to use that as well, because the number of Shaheds that are launched against Ukraine overnight can be very high, and so you need many type of different countermeasures combined. But I think also, yeah, please.
I just wanted to say, like, it's also a problem where you remove capabilities and you have to basically force Ukraine. That's what they do. They force Ukraine to shift their capabilities over to these systems that they can saturate the battlefield with, and that will open
Yes.
up opportunities for the Russians with conventional airstrikes, for instance, and missile strikes, because the air defense picture is shifting towards these mass attacks with Shaheds. So yeah,
Yes.
definitely interesting to see how many different means that the Ukrainians are fielding, because the more layers you have, the less you need to shift your capabilities. Right?
Exactly. And regarding the Shahed specifically, I mean, we're talking about a system that is not particularly sophisticated in terms of technology. It uses a piston engine with a propeller. It has, of course, honeycomb frame and composite structure. Especially in its latest iteration built in Russia. But we are not talking about a very high-end type of systems. The warhead has been improved as of late with tungsten effectors into the warhead, which is a high explosive, typically fragmentation warhead. But at the same time, the overall cost of the systems I mentioned before is not that much. And the thing is that Russia can produce them at scale, and as you said, I mean, when they are launched together with other type of weapons, and especially cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, this become very, very complex for Ukraine to counter them. And the Russians are also trying to make them more and more, let's say, resistant to electronic warfare, because they know that Ukrainians are becoming more proficient in that space, and so they want to kind of level again the playing field with Ukraine in this realm. And that's why they are putting different types of component into it. So if you have the presentation with the components, I can show you a few interesting aspects of it. So, for instance, at the beginning, Iranian-made Shaheds used a type of antenna or control reception pattern antenna that was basically with four arrays, but was not very high quality. And so the ability of basically Ukrainians to counter them with jamming and spoofing techniques was quite effective. But then the Russians started to realize that in order to overcome electronic warfare, they needed to integrate different type of components. And so they added control reception pattern antenna called Kometa, which is a Russian-made module to receive satellite signal from different type of constellations. That is hardened. Exactly, you can see it in the picture, which is hardened against electronic warfare. Is first of all integrated into a metal box, and then it has more powerful omnidirectional arrays that are more resistant to jamming and spoofing techniques. So that means that for Ukrainians to counter this type of component and make electronic warfare effects effective, they need a higher number of and more powerful jammers and electronic warfare systems to overcome this problem. At the same time, Russians are also kind of trying to make the Shahed more, let's say, more useful from a reconnaissance standpoint, and so it's interesting to see that in recent in recent days, and actually it is from today the news. It seems that Russians are also trying to integrate some kind of electro-optical sensor on the Shahed. So in the picture, you can see the 8 arrays Cometa module. This has not been found on Shahed specifically, but actually on gliding kits for Russian dam bombs. This was somewhat, I think, probably beginning of this year or late last year. But nevertheless, this is also a remarkable example, because we may see the application of this type of satellite receiver also on Shahed in the coming days. This is particularly difficult to counter because it can basically overcome electronic warfare, especially jamming and spoofing, from a lot of different sources, and so it's much more hardened against electronic warfare than previous iteration. um, and yes, so at the same time, as I was mentioning, electro-optical sensors have been allegedly mounted on Shahed. So this would allow Russians to basically see through the Shahed when it flies. And and the last picture, I think, is at the bottom of the presentation. You can see this is from today, and you can see that the Shahed, provided that this is actually a Shahed, so we don't know for sure, but this is from Russian Telegram channels. It seems that the Shahed is able to at least see trench systems, as you can see in the picture, and other stuff. So it can provide at least some kind of reconnaissance and intelligence gathering capabilities, while also be a strike platform. But if you go in the previous page, the previous slide, you can see also that the Russians are trying to integrate Starlink satellite receivers in the Shahed. So this was from late September, and this means that if the Russian manages to integrate at scale the Starlink, maybe using counterfeit or black market antennas and terminals, that means that Shahed would be much more resilient against spoofing and jamming techniques, because it can resort to low Earth orbit satellite basically signal, which is much more it's much resilient, right? And it can it has a lower latency compared to other type of satellite signals, and so this gives Shaheds let's say a more capable guidance and actually navigation system compared to others. So this is a problem. The Russians are adapting. The Russians are trying new possibilities, and that's why Ukraine needs to take stock of these lessons and continue to develop its own countermeasures, which is very important.
Yeah, and also not only would the Starlink make it more resilient to jamming, but it transforms the platform into a true loitering munition, where you can probably designate targets as you fly, which of course is a big threat, especially if you look at it from a tactical military point of view, and not just as a weapon that is aimed at terrorizing civilians and destroying infrastructure. It becomes a
Yes,
much more danger weapon for the military as well to handle.
yes, absolutely. That's actually a good point, because the Russians, by integrating different type of sensor, can also make the Shahed more maneuverable, more and actually easy to kind of command on the fly, basically, right? To select different type of targets or change its basically trajectory to avoid interception or to kind of strike a target that has been located, right? So this is of course a worrying trend. As far as as long as the Shahed continues to have a piston engine of that type, its speed will be not worrying, so still kind of slow flying attack drone, and so it may be less problematic to intercept compared to for instance loitering munitions that are much more maneuverable and agile like the Lancet. But at the same time, its warhead is much bigger, and so the damage that it can provoke it's much higher, and so that's why this is of course something that the Ukraine needs to focus on in the coming weeks. And also I'm very curious to see how how the Russians will try to exploit some of these potential new um, technological features for the Shahed, and if they will change also the concept of operations for this type of weapon. Um, One thing that I would like to stress, of course, is that in the counter-US, let's say, environment, and especially in Ukraine, and then I will stop myself because I know I've been talking for a lot. Um, uh, it's that it's never about the technology itself, or only the technology. It's also about the training and the tactics. So the three T's actually, as I often try to portray this aspect, is actually you cannot have only one. You need to have the three combined, because otherwise your overall effectiveness is much lower compared to if you are proficient also in training your personnel, and if you develop the necessary tactics, techniques, and procedures to kind of deal with the threat. And so in this case, and in the case of Ukraine, currently, what is really needed, I think, is to fuse all the type of sensors that Ukraine is now using to counter the Shahed into a single operational picture. This is something that also Western countries are working on, and I can guarantee that in the United States is an absolute priority in the counter-US space, because we have plenty of sensors, we have plenty of intercepting techniques and capabilities, but at the same time, the real struggle is to fuse all the sensors feed into a single operational picture. And basically, what I'm meaning is that every operator of the counter US capability of a broader integrated air missile defense wants to have everything on a single screen. This means that you need to fuse a lot of different type of sensor feed into a single kind of interface, which is much easier to read for anyone, which is easier to kind of exploit, and to basically extrapolate data from it and communicate them to other systems nearby or other capabilities. So many of the efforts now here in the US are to try to basically fuse everything into a single screen, and that's what I think also Ukraine needs, because I mean Ukraine is using a lot of different type of sensors, from electro-optical and infrared to radars, of course, and even acoustic. uh, all across Ukraine, there is a huge network of acoustic sensors that basically detect Shahed's drones and cruise missiles, right? And so, can you how can you fuse this type of sensor feed with others? How can you put together radar, the return from radar units, and acoustic sensors and electro-optical? That's the real challenge, and I think in the near future, in the coming months, Ukraine will try to work to kind of create something like this. The Delta the Delta application can become a good layer or a good baseline for kind of putting together this type of sensors. But of course, is a challenge because you need to develop a good sensor fusion interface. You need to have a good software for that, and at the same time, you also need to integrate AI to basically exploit algorithms to classify objects in the fastest possible way and to basically select the effectors that you want to use basically on the flight and very, very quickly.
Yeah, thank you so much. This a lot of knowledge, and yeah, Delta comes to mind. I know Ukraine is trying to use it as like an omni platform for everything from drone feeds on the battlefield to mapping systems, radar, aerial pictures, surveillance cameras that they put up, EW sensors or SIGINT sensors. But the distribution of the data to the right receiver is still a big problem and a challenge, and that's why we also see use of ad hoc systems like Discord, etc., being used in the field, because the adaptation of these systems aren't necessarily following the pace on the battlefield at the right, well, at the necessary pace. So yeah, that's interesting to follow this. I have one question before I wanted to go to Road to Mars, and it's about this new recon drone, because one of the speculations that I've seen out there about this is that they might be trying to track also electronic warfare systems on ground, radar systems on ground, with these recon drones, to then plan better the the next wave of attack, or maybe coming cruise missile attacks that are more important for the Russian side.
Mhm.
And do you have any opinions, or have you seen any information about that?
So the new recon drone, you mean the Shahed based type of drone with
Yes.
the kind of okay. Well, I mean, I think they, of course, the Russians are trying. I mean, they are not stupid, unfortunately, even though we tend so often to portray them as such. But yeah, of course, there are stupid people among the Russians, and a lot of them. But at the same time, their military has been despite the difficulties, they are also they have improved dramatically since 22. So you cannot underestimate your enemy, and so they are learning, and I think they are trying everything they can to basically exploit the technology that they can access. And simply the fact that they had to resort to Iranian drones at the beginning means that their drone program was lagging behind a lot in terms of how they could integrate these systems into the force structure, how many of them they had access to, and their production capacity. Now the things have changed. The Russians are producing drones at scale, really at scale, probably at the same level of Ukraine in terms of reconnaissance drone, especially, and also loitering munitions and attack drones. And so what they are doing is also trying to exploit commonalities between some of those systems, and to kind of make a platform that was originally conceived as an attack drone also a reconnaissance one. Why not? Right? Why not? Wouldn't you try to kind of exploit everything that you can fly into Ukrainians airspace to collect and gather intelligence? So that's why I think they are trying to experiment with this, electro-optical cameras on Shaheds. They are trying to put Starlink antennas into Shaheds. There was even an example of Shaheds using SIM cards, right? LTE connection, right, on the Shahed to uh, uh, kind of make it more easy or easier to change its flight path once it was launched. So at least that was the speculation. I haven't seen any more example of that type, but certainly the fact that they are trying to put electro-optical sensor on the Shahed, I think it's feasible. And actually, in Iran, we have seen examples of Shahed with also seekers and actually radar seekers in order to omen into radar basically sources and destroy that emitting source. That means air defenses, for instance, or
So,
other radars.
so basically,
So
a cheap
yeah,
variant of an anti-radiation missile.
correct. Yes, a very cheap variant and a very slow-flying variant so far. But we also know that Iran is integrating, and actually it has already demonstrated a jet-type Shahed. So the propulsion is different, and so this type of Shahed can fly much faster, of course, compared to the piston engine one that we are mostly seeing in Ukraine. And so that means that Ukraine should expect novel threats in the coming months, because Russia are experimenting with that, and of course they are using everything they have to collect intelligence. Because I mean, we have seen the improvement of Ukrainian air defenses in the past few months, right, and even more. And so the effectiveness of strikes from the Russians are somewhat decreasing in terms of kinetic impact, and especially I think since Ukraine managed to find ways to basically destroy Russian ISR drones uh, on a much higher scale compared to even 1 year ago. Now we are seeing, tens of, reconnaissance drones downed and shut down every month, right? Even more. So the eyes of the Russians are becoming less and less on the battlefield, and so they need to inject more, and they need to use everything they have as a collection, capability, basically at the same time.
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna give the word to Road to Mars. Road to Mars is one of the people helping us out in the basement, as we call it. So helping to collect data for the project with Andrew Perpetua. So for the map and also for the statistics that we follow. Road to Mars, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for what you said so far, Federico. It's been really interesting. One thing I'm wondering though is, last 2 weeks we've seen a lot of strikes going in to ammo depots, and I think a few weeks ago we saw one at a Shahed warehouse in, I think it was Krasnodar. So do you think that in the future we could see more of like these strikes trying to target the storehouses and warehouses for these, so that we're looking more at prevention rather than reaction?
Yeah, if the question is for me, and I guess so, thanks so much for the question. Yeah, I think so, absolutely. Ukraine has been trying to go after warehouses, and whether they are warehouses of regular artillery shells or missiles, or other type of weapons, continuously over time, and has been trying to convince Western partners to provide more long range weapons, more precision guided munitions with standoff capabilities in order to basically achieve this goal. But of course, Western hesitation has been a major factor impacting the ability of Ukraine to do so. But yes, that's true. We have seen a few, attacks, very very successful attacks against warehouses in the past few months. Starting from the operational level, ammunition depots, in Russia, to some of to the warehouse of the Shahed. I think it was, as you mentioned, last week or so. So Ukraine is always trying to be more proactive in its approach. It's not something that you can, of course, plan very much in advance, considering the limited number of factors that you have available, and especially Western hesitancy that is providing something, but it's never enough. And then 2 weeks or 3 weeks passes without anything, and then again a small batch of new missiles. And so how can you plan operationally without a meaningful basically magazine depth, right? So it's difficult, but when Ukraine has a chance, it will strike against ammunition depots, because that's one of the best way to basically degrade the Russians' ability to launch long-range attacks against Ukraine. So absolutely. And I think this should be stressed, even more when we have the possibility to talk about this topic, when we have the possibility to speak to politicians or to decision makers. We need to stress that long range effects are necessary, in order for Ukraine to remain effective into the fight, against a very capable enemy. And so at the beginning there was this kind of discussion about, oh well, I mean, Ukraine doesn't need to have ATACMS or Storm Shadow, because Russia actually moved all its aircraft and tactical aviation away from the range of those weapons. Well, yes, but there's not only airfield that you can strike. There's plenty of targets that you can go after with this type of weapons, and that are closer to the front line and to the border between between Russia and Ukraine. So this fixation on airfields, for instance, a few months ago, it has was crazy to me. Was literally nonsense, because I mean, as you can see in the slides now that you're showing, all the operational level ammo depots that Ukraine has managed to destroy. I mean, we are talking about months of production of long range systems. And that's the way to one of the ways to basically degrade the Russian capacity to attack Ukraine. So this is something that must be prioritized in the strategy, in the long-term strategy of Ukraine. And so Ukraine needs more weapons to do so. And I will never stop to argue about sorry, to use this argument with politicians and people that I can talk to here in DC as well, to convince them that it's necessary for Ukraine to win.
Yeah, and I think you're talking about how they need more drones to be able to do this. It actually brings me on to something else. I can't remember exactly when, it was a few days ago, the UK announced that they're looking for a new cost-effective long-range, basically kamikaze drone, and they wanted to have
Mhm.
200 to 300 kg payload, 600-kilometer range. So I think now
Yes.
we're seeing that even other governments and countries are starting to realize that, this is going to be a big thing in the future. It's what Ukraine needs. It's what they will need if they end up in a conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. It's good to see some Western countries that are literally, stepping up efforts to kind of introduce this type of capability. We're talking about, not a very high-end or sophisticated capability, but rather like a lower hand, medium lower hand capability in the spectrum, and which means you can produce them at scale. They are kind of expendable, and but they are still quite good to and can deliver effects at range and at scale. So UK is one of the countries, and it's good that you mentioned. Thanks for bringing that up. The US, of course, are working on this type of weapons. I was last week at the Association of the US Army exposition here in DC, and I can guarantee that many companies are trying to develop cost-effective cruise missiles. Anduril is one of the companies that is working in this space. They recently unveiled the Barracuda series of cruise missiles. So uh, the countries are working on it, and it's good. But at the same time, with a few exceptions, many Western countries, and especially in Europe, they are still convinced that, with some few sophisticated capabilities, you can basically win a war, which is not the case, because now you will have not just Russia, which is planning for a long confrontation with the West. I mean, 140 billion yearly of defense budget. That means something. The defense sector is the only sector in Russia that has not seen cuts in its budget, and actually it has increased. So, and they are planning to maintain this type of investments in the long run, no matter what the cost for other sectors. And I guarantee you that the Russian economy is becoming more and more dependent on the defense sector. So that means that either Russia continues to invest into this sector, or its economy will be crippled, and the state will risk to fail, basically. So they are investing more and more money. But at the same time, as I was mentioning, European countries are still hesitant, and except for the UK and perhaps France, you have Western European countries like Italy, unfortunately, Spain, and others that are not investing enough in this kind of a treatable, expendable, effects. So I think it's important to do so. And thanks for bringing that issue up.
Yeah, thank you so much for the responses. It was really great to hear.
Okay, I guess we have Daniele, and then we'll do the questions from chat afterwards, before we move over to the next topic.
Thank you, Erlend, and thank you, Federico, for your wonderful presentation. And yeah, regarding your point of the economy, I completely agree. And there is a lot of people and expert analysts that recently, in the last week, I think, they analyzed the current situation and explain how, despite from the outside, you can look at Russian economy, looks like much better than what you would expect, but in many explain that this was an effect of what you very well described, like a kind of doping of the economy with the money thrown into the defense sector in a nation that effectively is in a war economy, nearly war economy, or essentially war economy. And in fact, there has been the increase of some particular taxes, even on some amenities like vodka. There is also reduction in welfare spending, all to try to redirect resources on the defense sector. And this is clearly something that is very hard to sustain if you don't have a robust economy, and Russia doesn't have. So I agree. This is one of the points where I always had issues with people saying, "Oh, Russia is too big, has too much, it will never finish its own resources." This is not true. At some point, it doesn't matter how big you are. At some point, you will finish what you have if you don't have a good balance between things that you lose and things that you produce. Even US. And now, regarding your point, I had a few questions. The first one is regarding Starlink. So, can you tell us if there is a, because the issue with Starlink now is probably is a year that we know that Russian are able to use Starlink on the front line, but this was the first time that I heard that there was an actual use on a drone, and there is any movement, any report from US DoD or anyone in Washington regarding this, because in the end Starlink is a US technology. Okay, it's from a private, but it's supposed not to be used in this way. So there is any movement in these regards?
Thanks for the question, Daniele. That's actually something that has been in the news repeatedly, right, in the past few months, and especially since the end of last year, when there was this kind of evidence started to emerge of Russians using Starlink terminals, along in their trenches to have access to better communications. and then Elon Musk and DoD denied. First, they denied the allegations. Then, when evidence was clear, then they started to they worked on how to resolve this issue, and apparently they they come up with a solution saying that the basically DoD and Starlink and SpaceX actually we're working on basically deactivating or kind of stopping terminals that are in Russia from functioning. But actually, I mean, that's they say that they achieved this aim and the goal was achieved, but actually we are continuing to see Starlink being used basically by Russians. What's that means? Well, I mean, Russians have been able to adapt in during the war, especially because they have a great access to third parties and third countries in terms of components and technologies. So basically, the Russians are using black market Starlink antennas and systems or Starlinks that are regularly basically traded and commercialized across the world, but that are then basically sourced by Russia through the United Arab Emirates and other countries in the Gulf, or Turkey, or countries in Central and Eastern Asia. So basically, these terminals are still, usable, are regularly registered, but then ends up being into Russian hands. So the Russians are using those apparently, with success. So that means that the countermeasures and the basically the what the DoD and Elon Musk decided to do when the news was out is not working as effectively as they thought. So of course, here in DC, everyone, everyone is trying to understand why, but officials are very hesitant to provide any information or any news. Everyone is very careful not to provide any kind of data or information on this topic, and it's difficult to have basically insights on this. But that's my impression. That's the impression is that DoD countermeasures are not fully effective, and that's why Russia is able to basically use this type of technology alongside many others produced by the West into its own, weapons, and that's a problem, of course. But the thing is, I think the real issue is how can we enforce sanctions in a better way? How can we make sure the kind of the commercialization of components is not basically going to help Russia through third countries, through third parties, to fake companies in Turkey or Hong Kong or whatever. This is where governments need to really increase their focus on enforcing sanctions and make sure companies in Europe, in the US, are complying with those sanctions. Because of course there is an issue of compliance by the companies themselves, but at the same time there is also probably still ineffective control by governments and authorities on this type of trade activities and technologies that are exported to countries like Turkey and those that I mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. And another point is that geofencing is not usable in this sense, because it was intended in order to stop the use of Starlink in occupied territories and in Russia. But if you start to use these on a loitering munition or a drone, an attack drone that is inside Ukraine, it will be able to work, because the geofencing will not allow any type of blocks, because it will be effectively in Ukraine, and so why you should block it? So it starts to become more and more complex, because then you have to analyze at what speed is going in which direction. So it honestly become more and more difficult to block dynamically. And I agree with you that the best thing is to cut the head and avoid these things to arrive to the Russian market, so that they will not end up on the battlefield.
Yeah, that's
And
a good point. Thanks for bringing that up, of course.
no, yeah. And another question that follow this, because you show a lot of upgrades and type of technology that the Russians are trying to master and, of course, enhance. Um, Based on what you see, the people you speak, which are far more experienced than many of us here, um, the type of component that they design and produce are made by components that are sourced only Russia and China, or they come also from Western companies, or for other type of countries that, despite the will to help Ukraine, have some holes in their market.
Yeah, I think no, thanks for the question. I think, of course, the short answer is that many Western components are still found in Russian weapons. A lot of components. We're talking about microelectronics, and especially, particularly, sophisticated, components for, navigation modules, guidance systems, etc. Found not only in, missiles or cruise missiles of Russia, but also in drones. There was a very good RUSI report, I think, a couple of years ago on the Orlan 10 systems, the famous drones the famous drone used by Russia, and they found, a significant amount of Western-made components into it, and I think it's still the case. We know that some Western-made components are also used in the Lancet loitering munitions. For instance, the basically AI enabling board of the NVIDIA Jetson series has been found in the loitering munition in the Lancet. So that type of chipset basically allows the system to use some, I would say, artificial intelligence enabled applications, including terminal guidance, computer visions, and others. And that is a US made component. And plus many others type of components were also found in other weapons. Um, so that's across the board. That's a problem across the board. I was in an event basically 2 days ago here in DC about the supply chain of Russian artillery and artillery shells, and I was shocked to discover how much how much Western help feed into the production of Russian artillery shells. Of course, involuntary help, but at the same time, a lot of sources, raw materials are sourced either through Central and Eastern Asia countries, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan. And at the same time, the machinery that is necessary to basically build those shells, it's mainly Western made. We're talking about precision cutting machinery. We're talking about other type of assembling machinery that are used in Russia, in Russian factories. Even the cutting liquid used by Russia is sourced through Switzerland. So now, whether Switzerland stopped, whether this Swiss company actually stops stops to provide this cutting liquid to Russia, and Russia will have to resort to China. China is basically a surrogate of that, which is cheaper, but is of course also much worse in terms of quality. So this type of problem is really across the board, and the issue is that it's really difficult to enforce sanctions because companies are let's speak, very frankly here, and this is a real problem. This is actually very unfortunate. But companies, when they see the chances of not losing their business, right through, for instance, exporting more products to countries like Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. I mean, they don't care where the products end up, or very few of them care, because they haven't lost, sorry, the market share, right? But they perfectly know that those products are going to Russia, because I mean, I don't think Uzbekistan, the increase by 150% in trade with Italy and Uzbekistan was something. I'm sure the Uzbeki people are not like the real kind of cause of that increase in export, right? Let's be clear. So this is both an issue of compliance of sanctions by companies themselves, and the problem that governments are not, very effective in monitoring and controlling all the that the sanctions are actually respected. So and applied. So that's, I think, the problem.
Yeah, I mean, this ghost fleet has been discussed
Yeah.
many times. Yeah, and there is also an analysis of the, I think, the Kiel Institute, and also another institute in Italy. They tried to make out some numbers from this type of commerce. And the interesting thing is that it's bad, because it's bad, don't take me wrong. But if you take the amount of commerce that Italy had with Russia before the war, and you compare the, not the amount, essentially the value of the commerce that they do indirectly, is gigantically smaller than that. But of course, the problem is that most of this type of commerce is likely, as you said, more in support of the war rather than, I don't know, sending them Chianti or other commodities. So I think this is what make it even worse. It's not like sending them stuff that is not for the war effort, but it's likely to feed the war effort. And yeah,
Yeah.
another, a very last question, then I give the way to the chat. Uh, I guess that there is an enormous amount of data coming from the sensor and all the um, armed force involved in Ukraine. Do you know if there is a plan to share with the West, or they are already sharing with the West, with NATO countries, the data that they gather from, for example, all their attack, the how the Shahed or other type of system works during an attack, so that they are sharing this information with us, so we can learn, but also help them, or they are taking a different approach? And then this is my last question. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely, they are. I can guarantee you that a lot of companies, both from the US and from Europe, are in Ukraine now, to learn from Ukrainians in the, all the nitty gritty and details of drone warfare, for instance, and not just drone warfare, which actually is part of the broader warfare. So I don't like the term drone warfare, because it gives you a very narrow perspective, which is actually not the case, because drones are always used as part of a broader set of capabilities. So, but that said, yes, absolutely, companies are working very closely with Ukrainians. Not just on a bilateral base, but also within the NATO framework. The collaboration, cooperations between NATO and the Ukrainian military has become strategic now. It's very robust, and they have, for instance, into NATO there is a group called Joint Capability Group for Unmanned Aerial System, or JCGUS. So this group of people, which I constantly in touch with, they often have Ukrainian military experts, coming to Brussels, going to Brussels, or vice versa, and basically, I would say, collaborating, with each other, and exchanging, views and opinions, and data about, how drones are being used on the battlefield, and also counter drone as well. So, collaboration is becoming very, very solid and robust. um, and this is actually very important, because the only way for Western countries to become more proficient in drone warfare, or actually the use of drones, for instance, for modern warfare and other type of systems as well, it's the only way is to not just observe and absorb from Ukraine, but also ask the Ukrainians and learn from them. Of course, now we are, you know um, entering in a very dangerous, of course, dangerous narrative, and dangerous kind of topic, because you may also argue that each and every conflict is different, from others, and that's absolutely true. But there are still trends that are popping up in many different parts of the world, and so technology is again very much relevant, and there's no better way to learn how to use it than like asking some of the best and most experienced militaries in the world, which is Ukraine now. So collaboration is very robust, and I hope it will become even better and even deeper in the future.
Okay, thank you. I guess we'll go to a couple of questions. First with Brandon. Brandon is, of course, one of our researchers, and he also goes through some of or a lot of the news for Andrew's map, and he's mapping for Andrew every day. So he reads a lot of reports, and therefore he has a question, which is reading SEDESU's air raid reports. I noticed reports of several drones returning to Russian territory or landing in Belarus during each attack. Are these instances related to electronic warfare?
Yes, thanks for the question. I think they are most likely related to electronic warfare. Yes, meaning that Ukrainians' electronic warfare techniques are now very sophisticated, and they have also powerful technologies to experiment with in the first place, simply because Western countries are, as I mentioned, providing new technologies, and they want to see how they work in Ukraine in a very let's say intensive combat environment. So I would say that there could be also possibility that some of the drones, sorry, malfunction. But I'm also kind of confident that some of the drones that you mentioned, those returning to Belarus, for instance, or Russia, are likely, deceived by spoofing techniques. So basically, electronic warfare systems in Ukraine are kind of taking over the signal, the navigation signal, and injecting false or deceiving, signals to the drone and navigation system in order for it to, go astray and to lose itself either into Ukraine. And there was an interesting there were actually a lot of interesting examples of Shahed drones that started, basically circling around in the sky until their basically fuel was finished, and they simply landed or crashed on the ground, whereas others are fed with the saving navigation signals and go somewhere else, Belarus, Russia, for instance. So certainly I think most of the effects that we see are probably related to jamming, which is a different technique, but also spoofing is part of that. So you may want to have both in order to increase your chances of course, disrupting Shaheds, which we know are so far not particularly sophisticated, but they have a very resistant antennas, and so that's why you need also different types of electronic warfare technique.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just go to the next question. Karen asks, I remember the cardboard drones from Australia donated in 22-23. Do we know how they performed? This is a
Interesting
Ukrainian
question.
a drone
I
that was
remember.
used by Ukraine. Yeah.
I remember that type of drone. I don't recall the name of that system specifically, but it was a very interesting concept because they were basically made of cardboard, so super cheap. Actually, the overall structure probably very cheap, but then it depends on which type of sensor you put on it. But nevertheless, that's actually a very good question, and I admit I don't have sufficient data to comment more than saying that I haven't seen examples of those systems being used recently. So we probably or you will have probably to try to trace back to Australian sources and see if there is any report or any news about the use of those drones in Ukraine. But I haven't seen examples of that type of drone being destroyed by Russia or being used by Ukrainians explicitly. So also the quantity that was provided in 22 probably was not very significant. So maybe they are not in use anymore, or maybe Australia is now providing other type of systems. Also because that type of cardboard structure means that your payload capacity is very limited. We are talking about literally probably 1 kilogram or 2 kilogram maximum, depending on of course, the overall how big is the structure. But I cannot imagine a drone made of cardboard. Of course, it had an engine on it, but I cannot imagine a drone made of cardboard to have a significant payload capacity. So you can install a decent electro-optical camera, but then if you need to put electronic warfare payloads on it, or if you need to put other type of electronic intelligence or signal intelligence payloads on it, it needs a very powerful battery. And that means also that the overall weight of the system increases, and probably the structure cannot sustain it. So they could be useful for reconnaissance, but at the same time, if you need other effects, they are not very suited for that probably. So that's why we're not seeing that anymore. But I admit I don't know for sure if they are still kind of used by units in Ukraine. That's actually a very good question.
I think they are being manufactured in Ukraine now, or at least parts of it. Not sure for what sort of missions, but they were quite successful in the beginning. I'm not sure if it's true that it's harder for Russian radar to detect the cardboard drone, but that was kind of the word on the street. I'm not sure if that was a rumor or that was planted, or but yeah, they are cheap, and saturation is also welcome, I guess. But at least it was, because now it seems like the Russians are also moving towards these mobile fire groups, etc. That changes the economy a little bit. Okay, Brandon had another question. Do you have any insights on the Ukrainian counter UAS interceptor drone Sting that is reportedly being developed? And then I'll try to share my screen here, because the funny thing is that this drone is reportedly being developed by the Wild Hornets, which we are friends with. We had them on the stream. I also met them in Ukraine, and they've been featured quite often in some of these videos that Sternenko publishes of interceptions of Russian ISR drones or Russian surveillance drones. But this one is to now unseen publicly, and it's the Telegraph that has been reporting on this right now, actually today.
Yes, that's actually a very, very crucial decision by Wild Hornets, and I'm really happy for that decision, because this is a this is a much more effective interceptor compared to FPV drones, and it's really basically made from the bottom up with a single idea in mind, a single goal, to intercept other drones. And so I think this is a great examples of a cost-effective approach to counter US, because often the problem with counter US is that, of course, you need to make it as much as much cost effective as you can, but at the same time, we typically in the West think about counter UAS as something that you need a good rockets for that, or you need a good missile or small missile to intercept that aerial target, right? But actually, why not using drones, right? Drones are perfect to catch other drones, and that's reality of things, especially for small and medium, of course, type of interceptions and threats. So I mean, I don't have insights on the numbers that are produced, for instance, but I can say that this design is particularly helpful because, first of all, it can be deployed very easily, just like FPV drones, right? It has four engines, but the thing is that first of all, it has a bigger payload compared to FPVs, so the radius of its interception effect is it's bigger. And so even though considering the possibility that the enemy drone is maybe able to maneuver, or that the connection is not very good, and so the precision and accuracy of the interceptor is not very good, at the end of the day, if you have a bigger payload and the radius is bigger, then you have much higher possibilities of shooting down the target drone. Besides that, they most likely have, based on the images, and I'm sure Erlend and others that have been in Ukraine and talking to Wild Hornets can confirm this. It seems to have an electro-optical guidance, so basically there is likely someone behind that drone, operating it and countering the Russian drone. So this is something I think Ukraine can still improve, can work on to kind of automate that process, which is actually the key. If you are able to integrate the software that allows you to basically track and actually first you have to detect the drone, but once you detect it, the software basically allow you to track the target and lock onto it, and you just have to push a button. That it's perfect, because if you can add terminal guidance to this type of aerial interceptors, that means that your air defense against these drones, it becomes much more effective, and in terms of time that you require to intercept the drone, personnel that you need to make everything function, and effectiveness, and because the accuracy with terminal guidance is becoming increasingly good. So this is actually a very good development, and I like also the design, because this is something that, for instance, in the US has been already promoted as a potential design. Anduril, for instance, the company, has created a much bigger interceptor drone with this same design, called Roadrunner. And that type of interceptor drone is much bigger. It has a bigger payload. It's reusable and can be used against big targets. We're talking about especially Group 3 to Group 5 drones. It can fly quite high in terms of altitude. But the design is very similar. So I'm very happy that Ukraine is also experimenting with this type of thing, because at the end of the day, if you can, exactly, that's the Roadrunner. Good catch. Very efficiency in the Tochnyi team. So I'm very happy to see this. And by the way, yes, so it's reusable, and I'm not sure about the Sting, but the design seems like it could be reusable, and it's another added value of the capability. And so yes. Besides that, I don't have more insights, but probably someone else can chime in.
Well, yeah, you touched on some very important points there about the use of these sort of systems. Automation is super important, not only in the operation, but also in the detection of drones. These drones, like the one that we saw from the Wild Hornets, they are only valuable if you can, first of all, deploy them at scale, and also where you can relay the information about incoming drones to the correct people or systems that will hopefully be automated to intercept them eventually. Another thing is that such a small drone that is capable of taking down a very large threat and the damage potential is also not facing such a huge problem of collateral damage as some other anti-air systems are, where you need to have a lot of safety requirements and trained personnel operating the systems because of the risk associated with operating them in the first place, because you're handling very potentially damaging munitions, right? So you basically reduce risk as well, because the warhead of this kind of drone, like the one we saw from the Wild Hornets, is very small. So the potential damage that in itself can inflict on civilians is very small, or maybe non-existent almost. And the economy of scale, of course, is very important here. I do think that these things can be automated, but then you have to have a framework of detection systems in the first place. And I think that is still not necessarily widespread enough. We see, especially, and I'll try to show this as well, because we see where drones are being intercepted on the map, right, with the other FPV drones. And I think that's a good indication to see where Ukraine have the capability of signal intelligence and triangulation to detect enemy ISR drones. And then I will shut up so that I can get up the map. In the meantime, if Daniele and Federico have any comments, please go ahead.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No. Sorry. Please.
No
Daniele.
worries. No, I thank you for commenting over this new drone, which honestly is amazing, and I'm very happy to see all these different things coming out, like this new design, the digital communication starting to become more and more available. These are the type of technology that will allow these type of drones to become a very long-term threat, not only the use of stopgap solution that could be fiber optic cable, for example. And regarding the design of Wild Hornet, I want to say that these type of drones, as the FPV, have been already not on the market, but in the realm of FPV sport. Particularly, that design is one design that has been used for breaking speed record, is a kind of speed runner, and there are many iterations. The one that now is shown here is from a professional pilot that essentially created a complete new design, and this design broke the world record of 480 kilometer per hour. So you can imagine, and this was done with conventional material, but of course high-end components regarding motor and batteries and controller. But the biggest challenge is in developing these things. You can see these are small. That's the point. Developing something that is on a scale that you can put a warhead or a very hardened part in order to have a kinetic disruption of your target means having a quite heavy drone that you have to push at very high speed. And so I think what Wild Hornet have done is incredible because, of course, the concept was already there, existed, but they transformed what was a racing car in a fighter jet, essentially. Is incredible. Also, the idea of the landing gear, you can see a lot of lesson learned from FPV essentially transposed to this new drone. And I think from the picture you can see that there is a camera which most of the time on this type of drone is omnidirectional. So probably the um, the pilot can turn the head and turn the camera, so seeing in very rapidly the 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 change, and so the change on the camera, because he can just turn his head. And I'm sure that these type of drones, if not immediately, they will start to use also digital communication, which is fundamental when you have to fly at that speed, altitude, because you need a very low latency.
Yeah, that's our thanks. Those are all good points, and I absolutely agree. You know, maneuverability, speed, these are, essential. And, it may turn out that these kind of interceptor drones could become useful also for other tasks at the end of the day. And yeah, having also kind of a bigger structure compared to FPVs allows you not only to put like a bigger payload, but also to put a bigger battery, so much better endurance, right? And so that's important as well, and in the overall package, and of course digital signal, probably most likely encrypted, allows the operator to have a much better field of view, and then clarity of the image when there is the targeting process going on. So I really like the design, and I totally agree with you, Daniele, on the kind of the idea is great, because this is going to be a very effective addition to Ukrainians arsenal for counter drone.
Okay, I guess we have one more question before we kind of go forward with maybe talking a little bit about a different topic, if you have time still, Federico.
Oh,
Okay.
well, I mean,
Okay, I guess We can round up after this. No worries. So the last. Oh no, sorry, this is the wrong one. This was from the same guy. Yeah, from Marino. When Russia launches large-scale drone attacks on Ukraine and Ukraine attacks Russia at the same time with drones, how do they know which one to shoot down as they don't fly the shortest path? This is a very good question for our audience, I think. Yeah, if you are able to answer it, and then we can round off after this. Federico.
Yeah, I mean that's probably. I mean, I'm pretty sure there is some kind of coordination between the units that are planning the raid and the strike using drones in Ukraine with the rest of the military. Hopefully, I mean, and that means that not all it can also be. I mean, it is not necessarily the case because if you have a secretive mission, not everyone in the military is aware of it. But still, I think at the commander level, I mean, there's some kind of awareness of the type of drones that Ukraine is using during its attacks, and so the radar return from that type of drone, I think it's of course known to air defense operators, so they know precisely what type of drone they are seeing in their screen, and also pre-mission coordination in terms of the confliction, for instance, with the Air Force, that it's maybe flying other missions in the sky, and the Ukraine and the air defense as well. It's of course crucial. There have been instances of friendly fire, unfortunately, but mostly related to aviation, as far as the evidence tells us. But at the same time, yeah, this is a very good question. So it at the end of the day, it's about coordination, the conflictions across echelons and different services. So Air Force, air defense units, and commanders. And at the same time, the same goes for trying to shoot down Russian drones, because when you have large Shahed attacks, as we have seen before, you have to resort to different type of countermeasures, whether they are main pads from mobile fire groups and other units on the ground, whether they are short range air defenses, which Ukraine doesn't have in large numbers, by the way, or whether it is tactical aviation that takes off for shooting down drones. And we have seen instances of helicopters flying into the Ukrainian airspace to shoot down drones. We also know that aircraft have sometimes taken part to kind of attacks against Shahed. So the confliction is crucial. It's not always an easy task, but this is where effective and smooth C2, so command and control, comes into play. And the Delta app is something that really helps Ukrainians to do so. I'm pretty sure about that. And so something that many Ukrainians military people have confirmed to me in discussions. So the Delta app is crucial, and the more the Ukrainians improve it with other functionalities, the better, because this would allow them to basically also overcome some like the confliction issues that we have seen. But it's by no means a difficult thing. This is a good question. It's certainly difficult, and also for the Russians, by the way, because we have seen a lot of instances of friendly fire and fratricide among the Russian, not just the Air Force, but also in how they use air defenses. So
yeah, and this is these are two fields that kind of now merge, right? Because you have had friend and foe systems in the aerial perspective of warfare for a very long time, and then you started to have some similar systems, or at least intended to do the same thing as the Blue Force tracker system, for instance. There are several different ones that have been used for ground warfare. But the thing is that now, because of how things are evolving, especially in Ukraine. These two fields are merging, because you have people that normally would only operate maybe a very few unmanned aerial vehicles directly, are now suddenly operating hundreds, and if not thousands, only on the brigade level. And if you look at the overall army and ground forces in Ukraine, they're operating tens of thousands of flying vehicles. And that, of course, conflicts with the other systems that were supposed to prevent friendly fire, etc., on the aerial side of things. So yeah, this is very interesting. We have
Yeah,
a
absolutely.
merge of fields, right?
Yeah, totally agree. And also the altitude, the altitude settings, in for the drones that Ukraine, of course, uses are, probably different compared to what the Shaheds use. So this is also another way to distinguish between the two. But yeah, that's these. I mean, there are many factors involved. So it will become more and more important. The confliction is something that is also an obstacle for integrating, growing numbers of US into Western forces, for instance. I mean, NATO is constantly struggling with, basically implementing and actually agreeing upon and implementing the airworthiness of unmanned aerial systems for European skies and American skies as well. So to get the airworthiness, you need to basically make sure that system is complying with standards and basically rules of the of your basically aviation ecosystems and skies, and have it integrated in the best possible way to avoid incidents and disruptions of air traffic, basically.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, Federico. I understand that maybe you need to go somewhere else, but you're welcome to come back and talk to us at any time you feel that there's something you want to talk about with us on stream. Please join us again. This has been really, really good.
Thanks so much, everyone, and thanks for the patience and listening to the discussion. That was great, and I'm very happy to have contributed, and hopefully it was interesting for everyone. Thanks so much.
I think so. Yeah. Thank you so much. You can just walk silently out by logging out, and then we'll kind of round up at the end here. Thank you.